Hey everyone, I'm a 32-year-old guy who thought today was going to be the happiest day of my life. I've never been much of a Reddit user, but right now, I need to share this with someone. Maybe getting it all out will help me figure out what to do next. This might be long, but please bear with me. Let me start from the beginning. I met my fiancée, G.C. Let's call her Jessica, 4 years ago at a mutual friend's party. We hit it off immediately. She was beautiful, funny, and had this amazing energy that just drew me in. After a year of dating, we moved in together, and 2 years after that, I proposed. She said yes, and we started planning our dream wedding. The last 6 months have been a whirlwind of preparations. We both have large families and a ton of friends, so organizing everything was stressful, but also exciting. We decided on a beautiful venue, a charming old manor house with sprawling gardens. Jessica was meticulous about every detail, from the flowers to the table settings. I just wanted to marry the woman I loved. Everything seemed perfect. This morning I woke up with a mix of nerves and excitement. I was marrying the love of my life. My best man, Chris, was there to help me get ready. We had a few laughs, reminisced about our wild college days, and suited up. I couldn't wait to see Jessica walk down the aisle. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Jessica looked stunning in her dress, and when I saw her walking towards me, I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. We exchanged vows, and I remember thinking how genuine and emotional she seemed. We kissed, and everyone cheered. It was perfect. The reception was just as we had planned. Great food, heartfelt speeches, and lots of dancing. I was having the time of my life, soaking in every moment. Then, after a few hours, I decided to take a break and use the restroom. That's where things took a turn. I went into the bathroom, relieved myself, when 2 guys walked in. I didn't pay much attention at first, but then I heard one of them start talking. One of them was saying how he couldn't believe he slept with the bride last night. I froze as the other guy asked if he really did it right in her wedding dress. The first guy laughed and confirmed it, saying she was wild. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I stood there trying to process what I'd just heard. The 2 guys continued talking, discussing how Jessica said it was a one-time thing because she was nervous about the wedding. I was sitting on the toilet, and when they came out, it was like I was a different person coming out of the restroom. Back at the reception, I looked at Jessica, who was talking to some guests, laughing and smiling like nothing had happened. I tried to keep my cool, but inside, I was a mess. I needed to think. I needed to know more. Hello everyone, this is a new update, and I've read the comments and even got a lot of motivation from all of you. It's amazing how much support and advice I've received. People shared their own experiences and encouraged me to stay strong and focused on rebuilding my life. With that motivation, I knew I had to confront Jessica again. I needed closure, and there were still some loose ends to tie up, so I decided to pay her a visit. When I arrived at her house, I found her in a pitiful state. She hadn't left her room for a week. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. We started a very sincere conversation, and it became clear that she wanted me to come back. She spoke about how sorry she was, how much she regretted everything, and how she wished we could go back to how things were. I let her talk, but I didn't hold back. I put it quite bluntly and made it clear that it was all over. I told her I couldn't build a future with a betrayer, a bitch. She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. She needed to understand the gravity of her actions and how deeply they had affected me. She cried and begged, but my heart had hardened. I left her house feeling a mix of anger and sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. It was a step towards closure, a step towards moving on. About a day later, she showed up at my place. I barely recognized her. When I had seen her at her house, she looked like she had spent several days lost in the woods. But now, she looked stunning. She had clearly made an effort, washed up, put on makeup, and dressed to impress. It was almost laughable, this stark transformation. There's this premise that if you ignore a girl or even slightly demean her, she pays attention to you. It seemed like Jessica had taken this to heart. During our conversation, I had been rough with her, blunt and unsparing in my words. Maybe she thought that by looking her best, she could win me back, that I would forgive her. She started asking for forgiveness, her voice confident but with a hint of desperation. I listened to her for a moment, letting her spill her rehearsed apologies. But I was done. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her to fuck off with your apologies. Her face crumbled, and she immediately started crying. She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing there, shaking my head at her audacity. What she did defies any logic. Did she really think she could just waltz back into my life looking pretty, and I'd forget everything? It's like she didn't understand the depth of the betrayal, the trust she shattered. It made me realize even more that I had made the right decision to end things with her. With Jessica out of the picture, I had to think about the divorce. I didn't want to go to court if I could help it. I had already arranged everything on my end, but Jessica wasn't responding. She was avoiding the issue, probably hoping I'd change my mind. But that wasn't going to happen. I decided to give her some time to calm down, hoping she'd eventually come to her senses and agree to the divorce amicably. If not, I'd have to take further steps. Maybe I would even need to visit her again, though the thought of it wasn't appealing. During one of my therapy sessions, my therapist suggested I try something new, something I'd never done before. She said it could help me find a new passion, a new direction in life. So I decided to take up boxing. It was something I'd always been interested in, but never had the time or motivation to pursue. Boxing turned out to be a game changer. The physical exertion, the discipline, the focus required, all of it helped me channel my anger and frustration in a constructive way. My coach was tough but supportive, pushing me to my limits and beyond. Every time I landed a punch, I felt a little bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, but who had always been there for me. It was refreshing to catch up, to share laughs and stories. They reminded me of who I was before all this happened, of the good times we'd had. It helped me see that there was life beyond the betrayal, that I could rebuild and move forward. One evening, as I was sitting on my couch, I got a message from Jessica's friend, the one I had banged. She wanted to meet up and talk. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to open that door again, but eventually, I agreed. We met at a CAF GC, and she apologized for everything, for complicating things further when I was already going through so much. We talked for a while, and I realized she was struggling too. She felt guilty for what had happened and wanted to make things right. We decided to keep our distance, at least for now, to give each other space to heal. Well, she sucked me off in the car, but I feel so bad, so I decided to use this moment to relax a little. I know it's wrong, but what man would refuse to fuck, when in the long run it will not be for quite a while? As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a bit more like myself. I still had bad days, days where the weight of everything felt unbearable, but I also had good days, days where I felt hopeful about the future, where I could see a way forward. Now I'm sitting here writing this update and feeling a strange mix of emotions. It's been a hell of a ride, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm taking things one day at a time, focusing on rebuilding my life and finding a way to move past this betrayal. It seems that because of my past, God is only now paying me back. I was a bully in school, yes, the kind who picked on the weak, and being tall and athletic as a youth, it seemed there was no other way. I remember pushing around smaller kids, laughing at their expense, and generally being an asshole. But of course, I regret what I did back then. I've spent years trying to make up for it, volunteering, helping others, and trying to be a better person. Yet here I am, in the middle of a personal hell I never saw coming. Moving on to the juiciest part, around 2 a.m., my wife's mother calls me, crying hysterically. Through her sobs, she manages to tell me that Jessica is pregnant. Honestly, I tensed up immediately. My mind raced as I considered the implications. I just wanted to know how many weeks along she was, and hoped it wasn't mine. I suggested we go to the hospital in my car the next day to confirm everything. The next morning, I drove over to Jessica's parents' house. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with tension and unspoken fears. Jessica's father barely made eye contact with me, while her mother clung to Jessica, who looked like she hadn't slept all night. We all got into the car, the silence only broken by the occasional sniffle from Jessica's mom. The drive to the hospital was torturously slow, each passing minute making my anxiety grow. At the hospital, Jessica was taken in for a checkup while the rest of us waited in the corridor. I sat there, my hands clasped together, praying it wasn't mine. If the baby was mine, it would complicate everything even more. It felt like a knife hanging over my head, ready to drop at any moment. Time dragged on, and I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Finally, Jessica emerged, looking pale and anxious. Her mother walked over to me, her face a mixture of relief and concern, and said it was 2 weeks. Relief washed over me. There was a chance it wasn't mine since that guy had been with her around that time. However, he claimed it was only oral sex, which left me with a lingering doubt. I needed to know for sure, so I decided to ask Jessica directly. Back in the car, I turned to her. "Did you have intercourse with him, or was it just oral sex?" I asked bluntly. She looked taken aback, as if she hadn't expected me to confront her so directly. Before she could answer, I followed up with, "And when are you planning to file for divorce?" Her reaction was immediate and explosive. "What divorce? I'm pregnant with your child," she screamed, her voice echoing in the confined space of the car. It was like a switch had flipped inside her, and she was back to manipulating and throwing tantrums. A new skill she seemed to have perfected recently. This whole situation has been incredibly tough, but I couldn't let it derail my entire life. I needed to look for a job, to get back on my feet and regain some semblance of normalcy. I spent my days scouring job boards, sending out resumes, and going for interviews. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. I had to move forward, no matter how difficult it was. One afternoon, after returning from an interview, I found Jessica sitting in her car outside my house. She asked if she could come in to get her things. I let her in, hoping it would be a quick visit. She made herself a coffee and sat down, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She tried, for the 4th time, to seduce me, blatantly attempting to get into my pants. I turned around quickly, not wanting to deal with her advances, and my elbow accidentally hit her in the lip. She started screaming incessantly, ran outside, and began yelling that I had hit her. I went out and saw her lying on the lawn, screaming like a banshee. I looked at her and thought, what a bitch. When she came back inside, she cornered me with an ultimatum. "Either I stay with you, or you're going to the police station. Choose." Her eyes were wild, her voice dripping with venom. It was clear she was ready to do anything to maintain some control over the situation. Now I'm lying on the couch in the living room, hearing the noise of the TV, and typing this text. I don't know what to do. It feels like a demon has possessed my wife. The woman I loved is gone, replaced by someone I don't recognize and who scares me. She's now sleeping in another room, and every noise she makes sends a chill down my spine. I can't believe how much she has changed, how manipulative and volatile she has become. As I lay here, I'm trying to figure out my next move. The thought of a restraining order has crossed my mind more than once. I've been documenting everything, every threat, every outburst, just in case I need to protect myself legally. It's a grim reality, but one I have to consider. I also need to finalize the divorce. Jessica has been avoiding the topic, but I can't let this drag on forever. My lawyer has been helpful, but there's only so much he can do if she refuses to cooperate. I'm trying to stay patient, hoping she'll come to her senses and agree to an amicable separation. If not, I'll have to take more drastic measures. In the meantime, I'm focusing on finding a new job. It's tough, especially with everything else going on, but I need to keep moving forward. I've had a few promising interviews, and I'm hopeful something will come through soon. As I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I'm trying to stay positive. It's not easy, but I know I have to keep fighting. This journey is far from over, but I'm determined to come out the other side stronger and more resilient. Throughout the rest of the evening, I watched Jessica closely. She seemed so genuinely happy, so in love. How could she do something like this? I couldn't wrap my head around it. Every time I looked at her, I felt a mix of love and betrayal. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but I kept it all inside. When it was time for our first dance, I held her close, and she looked up at me with those big, beautiful eyes. I forced a smile and tried to act normal. She deserved an Oscar for her performance. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Finally, the night started to wind down. Guests were leaving, and Jessica and I were getting ready to head to our bridal suite. On the way, she noticed I was acting a bit off. I told her my stomach was hurting, which was only half a lie. The truth was, I felt like I was going to be sick from the emotional turmoil. She was concerned but didn't press me further, suggesting we get some rest. When we got to our room, Jessica was all smiles, talking about how perfect everything was. I played along, trying to keep up appearances. We changed out of our wedding clothes and she slipped into a beautiful white nightgown. Normally I'd be all over her, but tonight I felt a wave of nausea just looking at her. I told her I wasn't feeling well and needed to lie down. She looked disappointed but understanding. She lay down beside me, her back turned as she quickly fell asleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a chaotic mess. How could she do this to me? To us? Sleep didn't come easy. My mind was too restless, too full of questions and anger. I kept glancing at Jessica, sleeping peacefully beside me, wondering if it was all a bad dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. When I finally did drift off, it was fitful and filled with nightmares. I woke up early, feeling exhausted and still utterly confused. Jessica was still asleep, her face serene and innocent looking. I quietly got out of bed and grabbed my phone. I needed to do some digging. I started by checking our wedding photos on social media. Maybe I could identify the guys from the bathroom. I scrolled through countless pictures, but none of them seemed familiar. It was frustrating, but I wasn't about to give up. Next, I checked Jessica's phone. I knew it was wrong, but I needed answers. There were no suspicious messages or calls, nothing out of the ordinary. It seemed too clean, too perfect. My frustration grew. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water would help clear my head. As I stood under the stream, I tried to figure out my next move. Should I confront her? Should I wait and gather more evidence? Should I talk to Chris or another friend for advice? When I got out of the shower, Jessica was awake and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled. She asked how I was feeling, and I lied, saying I was better and just needed some rest. We went through the motions of getting ready for the day, but my mind was elsewhere. At brunch, I made an effort to be social, to thank our guests and enjoy the time with family and friends. But every smile felt forced, every laugh hollow. I kept scanning the room, trying to spot the guys from the bathroom, but it was no use. They were either gone or blending in too well. After brunch, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Jessica stayed behind to help clean up and chat with some friends. I wandered through the gardens, replaying everything in my mind. I needed to talk to someone, to get some advice on what to do next. But who? I saw Chris, my best man, talking with a group of friends. I waited until he was alone and then approached him. I needed to tell someone, and Chris was the only person I could think of. So I poured my heart out to him, recounting the conversation I'd overheard in the bathroom and my suspicions about Jessica. He listened intently, shocked and concerned, and agreed to help me figure out what was going on. Chris suggested we ask around discreetly to see if anyone knew who those guys were. He thought maybe it was a misunderstanding or some kind of cruel joke, but we needed to be sure. I agreed, feeling a bit of relief that I wasn't handling this alone anymore. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to act normal, but it was tough. My mind kept drifting back to that conversation, to the possibility that my new wife had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I needed answers, and I wouldn't stop until I got them. When we finally got back to our bridal suite that night, I felt the weight of the day crushing down on me. Jessica was in high spirits, talking about how perfect everything had been. I tried to match her enthusiasm, but it was an uphill battle. We got ready for bed, and she snuggled up next to me, clearly expecting a romantic night. I felt a pang of guilt for not being able to give her that, but my mind was too full of doubts and questions. I lay awake long after Jessica had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and wondering what my next move should be. I knew I couldn't confront her without solid evidence, but I also knew I couldn't continue like this for long. Something had to give. I just hoped I could hold it together long enough to find the truth. When I left off, I was in turmoil, my mind a chaotic mess. I couldn't let Jessica know what I'd overheard in the bathroom, but I needed answers. My best man, Chris, suggested that maybe Jessica had a spare phone she used to communicate with this mystery guy. It seemed like a stretch, but at this point, I was desperate for any clue. While Jessica was busy helping with the post-brunch cleanup, I slipped away to our room. I started searching through her belongings, feeling a strange mix of determination and guilt. Rifling through her suitcase, I checked every pocket, every compartment, and even inside her shoes. I moved on to her purse, feeling my heart race as I went through her makeup bag, wallet, and even the lining for any hidden compartments. Nothing. I stood there in our room, surrounded by Jessica's things, realizing how absurd this all was. Here I was, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, tearing through my new wife's belongings like a paranoid detective. It hit me then, just how much this whole situation had already changed me. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know the truth. After finding nothing suspicious, I rejoined the festivities, trying to act normal. I found Chris and updated him on my lack of progress. He suggested that we keep a close eye on Jessica for the rest of the day. If she had hooked up with someone from the wedding, there was a good chance they would try to meet again. Chris and I subtly shadowed Jessica as she moved around the venue, chatting with guests and helping with the cleanup. Every time she laughed or smiled, it felt like a dagger to my heart. How could she be so carefree if she had betrayed me so horribly? I kept my distance, but my eyes never left her. I watched for any sign of suspicious behavior, any secretive glances or hushed conversations. Hours passed, and I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The longer this went on, the more I began to doubt myself. Maybe I had misheard those guys in the bathroom. Maybe this was all a big misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. After a while, I excused myself and went back to our room. I needed a break from the constant surveillance. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I pulled out my phone and opened Reddit. My post from last night had garnered a lot of comments, and I scrolled through them, hoping for some advice or insight. The comments were a mix of outrage, sympathy, and practical advice. Some suggested confronting Jessica immediately, while others advised gathering more evidence first. One comment, in particular, stood out. It was from someone who had gone through a similar situation. They emphasized the importance of staying calm and methodical, even when emotions were running high. They advised not to act on impulse, as it could make things worse. As I was reading, Chris burst into the room, his face a mix of excitement and anger. He told me he thought he knew who the guy was. My heart raced as he explained that he had been talking to some of the younger guests and overheard a group of guys laughing about last night. One of them, a kid about 18 or 19 years old, seemed to be bragging a little too much. I felt a surge of rage like never before. I didn't care who this kid was, I just wanted revenge. Chris led me to where the group was hanging out, and I immediately spotted the guy. He was short, probably about 5'7", with a cocky smirk on his face. I'm 6 to 7 inches and towered over him as I approached. Without a word, I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him away from his friends. Chris followed, making sure no one interfered. We found a secluded spot behind the venue, and I shoved the kid against the wall. He looked scared but tried to play it cool. "What's your problem, man?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. I clenched my fists, barely holding back my anger. "Did you sleep with my wife last night?" I demanded. His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment I thought he might deny it. But then he nodded, a cocky grin spreading across his face. "Yeah, she wanted it. She led me to a room, asked me to get off her dress, and then took it in her mouth. She was begging for it, man." I saw red. Without thinking, I punched him square in the face. He staggered back, clutching his nose as blood started to flow, and I hit him again, and he started bleeding so badly that he even stained me. "That's enough," Chris said, his voice firm. "We need him to talk, not pass out." The kid was on the ground groaning in pain. I took a deep breath, trying to control my rage. "Tell me everything," I demanded. Through bloody lips, he recounted the events of last night. Jessica had led him to a room, told him she was nervous about the wedding, and things escalated quickly. He described everything in graphic detail, each word like a knife to my heart. When he finished, I was shaking with anger. I wanted to hit him again, to make him feel the pain I was feeling. But I knew it wouldn't help. I had the information I needed. I had proof that Jessica had betrayed me. Chris helped the kid to his feet and told him to get lost. He stumbled away, clutching his nose and cursing under his breath. I stood there, trying to process everything I had just heard. Back inside, Chris and I devised a plan. We would confront Jessica in front of everyone, expose her lies, and make sure everyone knew what she had done. It was the only way to get the closure I needed. We waited until most of the guests had gathered in the main hall for a final toast. I took the microphone and called for everyone's attention. Jessica stood beside me, looking confused and concerned. I started by thanking everyone for coming and sharing in our special day. Then I turned to Jessica and said a few warm words about our relationship. She smiled, clearly touched by my words. But then I called the kid up on stage. The room fell silent as he walked up, his face still bruised from our encounter. Jessica's smile faltered, and she looked at me with wide eyes. I handed the microphone to the kid and told him to tell everyone what he had just told me. He hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously at Jessica, but then he started talking. He confessed to everything, detailing how Jessica had seduced him and what they had done. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Jessica's face turned white, and she started yelling that he was lying, that he had forced her. I turned to her, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "If that's true, why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She stammered, making excuses, but the damage was done. Her mother started yelling at her, demanding to know the truth. The boy's parents quickly ushered him off the stage, looking horrified. With the truth out in the open, I felt a strange sense of relief, but there was still one more thing I needed to do. I went back to our room and started packing my things. As I was finishing up, one of Jessica's friends came in and admitted that she had known about the affair. She claimed Jessica had confessed to her and that she had tried to convince her to come clean. I didn't want to hear it. I told her to leave and locked the door behind her. Now, I'm lying on the bed in a room locked from the inside, writing this to you. Of course, all names were made up to preserve anonymity. So here I am, alone on what should have been my wedding night, wondering where things went so horribly wrong. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I can't stay with someone who betrayed me so deeply. Thanks for listening, Reddit. I could really use some advice on where to go from here. Hello, everyone. I'm already home, and everything was destroyed by my wife 3 days ago. As if the shock and heartbreak weren't enough, I immediately started having problems. It wasn't me who cheated, but somehow, in a male-dominated environment, even if you're a real manly man with a huge beard and biceps bigger than your head, you still get blamed if your wife cheats on you. I found out the hard way that some friends are not really friends at all. Word got out about what happened, and instead of support, I faced mockery and scorn. My so-called friends started spreading rumors at work about me being a cuckold. It was like high school all over again. But this time, the stakes were higher. Every snicker, every sideways glance felt like a punch to the gut. The worst part was my boss. He called me into his office one day, ostensibly to discuss a project. Instead, he started making thinly veiled jokes about my situation. "I heard your wife has a very active social life," he said with a smirk. I tried to ignore it, but he kept pushing. "Must be tough knowing she's out there, entertaining other men while you're stuck here." I couldn't stand it anymore. I quit my job on the spot. Walking out of that office felt both liberating and terrifying. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay there. After quitting my job, I didn't know what to do with myself. I spent a lot of time just staring at the walls, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. That's when I remembered Jessica's friend, the one who had come into my room that night. Initially, I had told her to leave, but after writing that Reddit post, I couldn't stop thinking about why she had come to see me. I found her later that day and told her I needed help. We talked for about half an hour, and she was sympathetic, understanding in a way I hadn't expected. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were having sex. It was intense, almost desperate, like I needed to feel something other than pain and betrayal. She tried really hard because I was feeling so bad, and it was almost like she pitied me. I know it was wrong, but I needed to release some energy somewhere. We fucked like animals, and I loved it. Now she's been writing to me for the past 2 days. I'm starting to worry she might become a problem if she tells someone. To distract myself, I started going back to the gym. I couldn't stay at home. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me. The gym was my escape. The routine of lifting weights, the physical exertion, it all helped me focus on something other than my broken heart. I pushed myself harder than ever, lifting more, running faster, trying to drown out the emotional pain with physical exhaustion. My parents have been calling me constantly, checking in to see how I'm doing. I know they mean well, but it's been driving me nuts. Every time I hear my mom's worried voice asking if I'm okay, it just reminds me of how far from okay I really am. I understand their concern, but I'm not thinking about suicidal thoughts. I'm too angry for that, too filled with the need to rebuild my life and prove I'm stronger than this betrayal. In the evenings, for the past 3 days, I've been going to the bar. Now that I'm single, I've started leading a very libertine lifestyle. The bar has become my second home, a place where I can forget about my troubles for a while. I drink too much, flirt with women, and occasionally take one home. It's not healthy, I know that, but right now, I need the distraction. Every night the pattern repeats. I walk into the bar, order a drink, and let the alcohol numb my senses. I chat with strangers, laugh at jokes I don't find funny, and pretend everything is fine. It's a temporary escape, but it's better than sitting at home drowning in my thoughts. On the third night, after a few too many drinks, I found myself opening up to a bartender I barely knew. I told him everything about Jessica, the wedding, the betrayal. He listened without judgment, just nodding and refilling my glass. It felt good to talk to someone who didn't know me, who had no expectations or preconceived notions. But as the days went by, I started to realize that this lifestyle wasn't sustainable. I was spiraling, and I needed to find a way to pull myself out of this mess. One morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I needed a plan, a way to move forward. I decided to focus on rebuilding my life. The first step was finding a new job. It wasn't easy, but I updated my resume and started applying to places I thought might be a good fit. I also reached out to some old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years but who I knew would support me. My therapist helped me see things more clearly. She made me realize that I wasn't to blame for Jessica's actions. She also helped me understand that it was okay to feel angry and betrayed, but that I needed to find healthier ways to cope with those emotions. I started setting small goals for myself, things I could achieve each day to help me feel more in control. I also began reconnecting with my family, letting them know I appreciated their concern and that I was working on getting better. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a bit more like myself. I still had bad days, days where the weight of everything felt unbearable, but I also had good days, days where I felt hopeful about the future, where I could see a way forward. So she's been at my house for 3 days now, and it's been hell. I couldn't just kick her out, especially after she screamed that I hit her. Her threats hung over my head like a dark cloud. I was constantly on edge, worried that any wrong move could land me in more trouble. I knew I had to tread carefully. The last thing I wanted was to end up in a situation where her lies could cause real damage. So, I decided to consult a lawyer to find out how to legally evict her from the house. I went to my lawyer's office the next morning, laying out the entire situation. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, and then explained my options. I needed to file for divorce and simultaneously seek a restraining order to have her removed from my house. It sounded straightforward enough, but I knew it would be anything but. Still, it was a necessary step if I wanted to regain control of my life. With my lawyer's help, I filed the divorce papers and the request for a restraining order. It felt like a weight was slowly starting to lift, knowing that I was taking action to protect myself. That evening, I decided to tell Jessica about the court filings. "Leave now, or I will call the police," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She, of course, disagreed vehemently, launching into another one of her tantrums. She called me every name under the sun, screamed about how unfair I was being, and even threatened to make my life even more miserable. I sat on the couch, trying to block out her tirade. About half an hour later, she went outside. I didn't know what she intended to do, but I seized the opportunity. I locked the door behind her and immediately called the police. As I was on the phone, she started banging on the windows, screaming accusations that I had raped her, that I was a Nazi, and that I was a racist. I couldn't believe the lengths she was going to. I grabbed my phone and started recording her outbursts. When the police arrived, they caught the whole scene on their body cameras. Jessica was completely unhinged, shouting and pounding on the glass. It was a relief to have their presence there, validating my side of the story and capturing her insanity. The police managed to calm her down and took statements from both of us. I showed them the footage on my phone, and they reviewed their own recordings. Jessica was issued a warning and told to leave the premises. She was furious, but had no choice but to comply. The next step was preparing for court. I really didn't want to go to court, but it had become unavoidable. My lawyer and I spent hours going over every detail, making sure we had a solid case. We compiled all the evidence, the recordings of her screaming and banging on the windows, the police reports, and her erratic behavior over the past few weeks. The day before the trial, I was a bundle of nerves. I tried to stay calm by focusing on the preparations. My lawyer reassured me that we had a strong case, but the uncertainty of the outcome was still daunting. I spent the evening reviewing my testimony, making sure I could recall every detail accurately. The day of the trial finally arrived. I walked into the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest. Jessica was already there, looking defiant. Her lawyer stood beside her, whispering in her ear. I took my seat next to my lawyer, who gave me a reassuring nod. The proceedings began, and I was called to testify first. I recounted everything: the wedding, the betrayal, the accusations, and the subsequent events. I presented the recordings and the police reports, all of which painted a clear picture of Jessica's unstable behavior. Her lawyer tried to discredit me, but the evidence was overwhelming. When it was Jessica's turn to testify, she stuck to her story, claiming I had abused her and that she was the victim. But her performance was unconvincing, especially in the face of the recorded evidence. The judge listened carefully, his expression growing sterner with each of Jessica's contradictory statements. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally delivered his verdict. He ruled in my favor, granting the divorce and the restraining order. Jessica was ordered to stay away from me and my property. It was a decisive victory, and I felt a surge of relief wash over me. After the trial, I returned home, feeling a mix of exhaustion and elation. The ordeal had been draining, but I had come out on the other side. I was finally free from Jessica's manipulation and threats. I could start rebuilding my life without her looming over me. Back at home, I sat on the couch, reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been a long and painful journey, but I had survived. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. My parents, who had been a constant source of support, were thrilled with the outcome of the trial. They had worried about me every step of the way, and seeing me come out victorious brought them immense relief. I made an effort to spend more time with them, to show my appreciation for their unwavering support. As I sit here typing this update, I feel a sense of closure. The past few months have been a roller coaster, but I've learned a lot about myself and what I'm capable of. I've faced my demons and come out stronger, so after everything I've been through, there's still one unresolved issue: the pregnancy of my now ex-wife. That lingering question had been gnawing at me for weeks, hanging over my head like a dark cloud. The drama with Jessica, the divorce, and the court battles had taken a toll on me, but this last piece of the puzzle was crucial for my peace of mind. After the police and court proceedings, my ex-wife, Jessica, stopped trying to contact me. It seemed she finally realized that her efforts were futile, that I had moved on and was no longer susceptible to her manipulations. The silence was a welcome relief, allowing me to start rebuilding my life without her constant interference. 12 weeks had passed since the court ruled in my favor. During that time, I had been anxiously awaiting the results of the DNA test. It turns out that the test could only be performed after 10 weeks of pregnancy, and then you had to wait another 2 weeks for the results. Those 2 weeks felt interminable, filled with a mix of hope and dread. Finally, the day arrived. Jessica's parents had requested that we all open the envelope with the results together. Despite my reluctance, I agreed. When I entered their house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jessica was there, and she looked terrible. She was pale, her eyes red and puffy from crying. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity for her. But then the reality of what she had done to me came crashing back, and my resolve hardened. We gathered in the living room, the envelope lying ominously on the coffee table. Jessica's parents looked at me with a mix of hope and despair. I could tell they wanted this nightmare to end as much as I did. I reached for the envelope, my hands trembling slightly as I tore it open. The moment of truth had arrived. I unfolded the letter and scanned the words. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the results. Not the father. Relief flooded through me, and I started to laugh out loud. It wasn't a quiet, polite chuckle, but a deep, hysterical laugh. The kind you see in movies like Joker, when he's on the bus, laughing uncontrollably. All the tension, the anxiety, and the fear poured out of me in that moment. Jessica's reaction was immediate and explosive. She burst into tears, screaming, "It's your child, you bastard! How can you deny it?" She had a complete meltdown, hurling accusations and sobbing uncontrollably. Her parents tried to calm her down, but she was inconsolable. I watched the scene unfold, feeling strangely detached, almost like an observer to someone else's life. I left their house, and as I stepped outside, it was as if a veil had lifted. The world seemed bright and vibrant again. Since the moment she cheated, my life had been shrouded in a gray fog of despair and confusion. But now, with the truth finally revealed, I felt like I could breathe again. I walked to my car with a lightness in my step that I hadn't felt in months. I drove straight to my friend's place. He had been one of my biggest supporters through this whole ordeal, and I knew he'd want to hear the news. When I arrived, he greeted me with a concerned look, but that quickly turned to joy when I told him the results. We decided to celebrate, and before long, we were getting really drunk. We reminisced about old times, shared stories, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had come back to life. The euphoria I felt was indescribable. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was so happy, thinking about the new life and new adventures that awaited me. It was better than any drug, this feeling of freedom and hope. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them head on. I want to say thank you to everyone who supported me through this. In a twist of irony, it turns out the child isn't even that 19-year-old guy's. Jessica's meltdown had inadvertently revealed that she wasn't sure who the father was. She had been with multiple men around the same time. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, trying to pin the pregnancy on me or the kid she had slept with, only to end up in a worse situation than before. This journey has been long and painful, but it has also taught me a lot about myself and my resilience. I've faced my darkest fears, confronted painful truths, and emerged stronger. The future is uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I'm not afraid. I'm ready to embrace whatever comes next, knowing that I have the strength and the support to handle it.